Welcome to today's webinar, From Regulations to TikTok Bans, Online Privacy Trends and Their Relevance for Educators. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Paul Cotter. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at Stukent, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this event today. As we begin, I want to encourage you to please use the chat feature throughout today's event. Go ahead and start out right now. Tell us where you're watching from today. Tell us what school you're teaching from. We'd love to hear from you. Love to see where you're at right now. Also, so that you know, our team is behind the scenes throughout today's event to monitor any questions that you might have. So feel free to put any questions in the chat at any time. As we begin, I want to encourage you to also pay attention to some of the other events that we have coming up. We have a host of webinars that are coming up soon. And some of our sessions are Keeping Your Course Relevant, Lessons from 15 Years of Marketing Evolution, 6 Engaging Real-World Projects for the Accounting Classroom, Instructional Design Strategies in Higher Education, How EdTech and Institutions Can Work Together, and From Campus to Career, What Sales Employers Are Looking For. So be sure to click on the link on your screen to register or find out any additional information about any of these webinars. Now, if you can't stick around for all of today's session, don't worry. We'll be sending out a recording of the session to all who attended and all who registered, along with a brand new social media marketing assignment. So stay tuned for that later on. After Alexa's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So be sure to save your questions for that. And this goes without saying, if you have any comments to give, please be respectful and polite today. Now, as a special gift just for attending today's webinar, we want to offer you free instructor access to our Essentials of Social Media Marketing courseware and Simternship. This bundle is a comprehensive package that features more than 100 instructor and student resources, including a groundbreaking simulation, annually updated courseware, engaging assignments, auto-graded quizzes. There are lecture slides, there's lesson plans, a sample syllabus, you name it, it's in there. Everything in this bundle is designed to seamlessly integrate theory with real-world experience and to equip your students with the skills and confidence that they need for success in social media marketing. So go ahead and click the link that's on your screen right now, and you can get free instructor access for that. Now, while you're taking a second to request this access, I want to invite Alexa Fox to the stage, and I want to introduce her. So Dr. Alexa Fox is an associate professor of marketing at the University of Akron, where she teaches social media marketing, digital marketing, and consumer behavior. She earned her PhD in business administration and from the University of Memphis, her MBA in strategic marketing, and her BSBA in international business from the University of Akron. Alexa's research interests include digital marketing, user-generated content, online privacy, and sharenting. I had to look up and see what sharenting is. Her work has appeared in journals such as the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, the Journal of Business Research, Journal of Advertising, and Computers in Human Behavior. Along with this, she's had book chapters, national conferences, and even been in Forbes.com. Alexa, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. I'm very happy to be here today.
Well, we are thrilled to have you here. I'm going to turn the time over to you and let you take it away with your presentation.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for joining, and I'm really looking forward to today's session. As you heard, this is a topic area that's of interest to me. I do my research in this area. I integrate it into my courses. I teach consumer behavior, digital marketing, and social media marketing. And in particular, I use the Essentials of Social Media Marketing textbook that Paul was talking about at the beginning of the webinar in my social media marketing classes. I've done that for a number of years now, and with how easy it is to keep things current, from how often they update the textbook and provide a lot of really great materials for assignment ideas, it's been tremendous. And so I love integrating this topic into the class as well, which is online privacy, because I think it's a really important, but yet maybe sort of under discussed topic. And so I'm happy to talk about it today and share a little bit about my perspective on it, what impact it might have for higher education, and just also kind of taking a look at relevant privacy issues, specifically online privacy issues, that I think could make for some good discussion as you prepare for your upcoming classes this fall. So we'll go ahead and get started with it. And so again, here's my presentation, from regulations to TikTok bans, online privacy trends, and their relevance for educators. So I am very curious to start out with a question. What does privacy mean to you? And so if you are willing to use the chat feature and just put your answers to this question in the chat, that would be great. What does privacy mean to you? And even if it doesn't mean anything to you at this point, or not really, you haven't given it a lot of thought, that would be a perfectly fine answer as well. So I'll give everybody just a moment to respond. So we have one response that says keeping personal information confidential. And I love the words in that response, because there are pieces of that we're going to talk about today, which is actually all four of those words work really well. Keeping sort of also gets at the idea of protecting. So sort of the idea that we're guarding something, that we're keeping something. And that's a really important aspect when it comes to online privacy. We're going to talk about that today. And then the phrase personal information. And we're going to look at what that means, because some people consider personal information to be a little bit more maybe sensitive, very, very personal, in the sense that it would be very risky to have it exposed. That is personal information. And others might perceive it to be really anything that could be possibly identifying. So it kind of varies a little bit. We'll talk about that. And then the idea of confidentiality. So being able to have it to yourself and not shared with, especially maybe people who you wouldn't expect. And now the question I sort of have, and this isn't necessarily one you'd have to include in the chat, but one that I'd just like you to consider, is asking this same question: what does privacy mean to you? Do you think it differs in an online versus an offline setting? A lot of times I have had the opportunity to have that conversation with people. And when you really start to peel back the layers of what online privacy means, you realize that it's not just about that digital space, that online space, that if you're thinking about privacy more broadly, you really think about how it impacts different areas of your life, even when you're not using a smartphone, a computer. And so thinking maybe about the way that online privacy takes the forefront, I think, but really how some of these terms, that even the ones that came up, protecting something, keeping it confidential, what does something that's personally identifiable mean to you? Are there different rules that you abide by when it comes to how you share personal information or how you don't share personal information? Those things might vary a little bit when it comes to an offline versus an online setting. And so today we're going to really focus on this idea of online privacy. We're going to get into social media privacy and sort of look at, again, sort of what are the implications for marketers and for educators. So if we kind of take a look at this chart here that we see from Statista, this is a current chart that takes a look at the growth in social media users. And when I created my initial social media marketing course here at the University of Akron in 2018, there were just over 3 billion social media users. Not saying just as in it's not many, but that was the number just a few years ago. And now we're at more than 5 billion, as you can see from this chart, right? So in 2018, we're looking at 3 billion. And now here we are in 2024, looking at 5 billion. So in that short amount of time, where 2018 doesn't seem like so long ago in some ways, in others, maybe due to COVID and other things, it might seem like it was forever ago. But it's really astounding to see what that growth has looked like. And it's projected to continue to grow as we look towards the next few years as well. So after decades of use and billions of people using these social media platforms, there's finally a lot of scrutiny around social media in today's modern world. So a lot of those come from what we're hearing now most prevalently in the media that are concerned about addiction and the mental health concerns related to social media and some of the safety related issues that can come from especially very regular use of social media. And so I want to sort of highlight a few other issues that maybe aren't discussed quite as often, but are still maybe contributing to this conversation that's happening much more openly, I think, in today's world. So let's take a look at a few events that have occurred in the last few years to then bring us up to current times in 2024. So let's go back a few years to 2021. I wanted to just show an example of work that I co-authored with my friends, Mark Pelletier and Alicia Horkey, where this was published in the Journal of Business Research in 2021. And it was showing that Meta has a choice that users need to recognize. As a platform, as a company, and it has these multiple platforms that are very popular, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, that specifically in this context, we were looking at Facebook, Meta can continue to show users only content that will make them stay on Facebook, or it can risk losing users. And this is something that we found from this research. So in other words, there's a lot of opportunity for Meta to kind of create this space where people are seeing the content and are able to consume the content that they're interested in, the content that maybe sometimes supports the views they have as existing views. And so many platforms have gotten themselves into hot water over the years about things like this. How does the algorithm determine what content is shown, what content isn't? And when we see these kinds of things happening and we start to look at what people want to see when they're using social media, what type of content they're interested in seeing, and then the platform makes the decision to continue to pursue that because as a business, they would want to make sure that it stays relevant and useful for their consumers. A lot of times we are looking at some challenges that are related to privacy issues with these hot water type issues that we're seeing. And so this is an example from, like I said, a few years ago when we are starting to see some of this conversation happening about, is Facebook going to, at the time, especially before it officially became Meta, is Facebook really going to be able to kind of own up to some of these things? Or are they going to say, we're going to show people what they want to see, which is the type of content that might sort of reinforce their pre-existing views or support some of those issues and maybe not show a broader picture. Let's move forward to the next year. Apple makes it so that iPhone apps must ask users whether they want to be tracked as of 2022. And so now if we're looking at Meta, we saw Meta start to come in as really sort of the parent company name around this same time. Now Meta can engage in less data gathering and digital ad targeting, which can lead to a change in ad spend patterns. And so this is really something that we saw at this time where these big tech companies, again, are making some of these decisions that have a lot of implications for marketers as well as for consumers, because as the ecosystem changes, Meta's recognizing that their apps, their most popular apps, their Instagram and their Facebook apps are being used very prominently on iPhones, and with iOS being a big sort of issue with that. So they are somewhat at the mercy of decisions that Apple makes, where now they have to decide if they want to be tracked. And there was sort of this push at the time, a couple of years ago, for more privacy, more protection as it relates to consumers, and that consumers should have the choice. There should be more opt-in as opposed to opt-out of some of these features. So by default, you're not being tracked. You have to choose that, right? But the challenge is, when that's the case, then there's going to be so many less options for Meta to be able to say, we're going to be able to provide such detailed data to advertisers to make this platform a lucrative one to promote their company on. So ultimately, there's so many different parties at play when these big tech companies are making these decisions that ultimately impact not just marketers, but the end users who are receiving the information. If the ads aren't as targeted, they might not be as useful. But on the other hand, perhaps their privacy is being protected. Yet at the same time, many people, when they're using platforms like Facebook or Instagram, they don't even really think in a lot of cases about their privacy. It's sort of this intangible thing that it's not really something you're thinking about all the time unless there becomes an issue. So there's so many different layers of this that, again, started to really put at the forefront how much we needed to really start to think about these issues. So then let's look to last year in 2023, when Pew Research surveyed thousands of Americans regarding their data privacy, and they compared the results to 5 years prior to that. So 2018 compared to 2023 results. And they found that compared to 5 years ago at the time, Americans are more concerned about government use of their data. They feel more unsure of what companies are doing with their personal data. And they feel that they have no control over what the government or companies do with their data. So these two entities, the government and companies that have access to their data regularly, they feel that they are more concerned about it. They're not sure what's happening with it, and like they have little control, which is not very empowering to consumers. Consumers maybe feel that they're at the mercy of these big entities that you hope would have the best interest of protecting that data in mind, but maybe they're not sure. They don't even know necessarily how this information is getting used. So then it takes us to 2024, which we're halfway through the year at this point, which is really hard to believe in a lot of ways. But here we are looking at a sort of different place. And I've set up the stage, hopefully, for these last few years to highlight a few different occurrences that, have sort of gotten us to where we are in 2024, plus a lot of other things that have happened along the way, but just some examples. And now that we're here at this point of 2024, I want to look at a few trends that are happening currently and that are unfolding right now that I see as having an impact for the future, for marketers, and like I said, for educators, and something that as marketing educators in many cases, or educators who teach students about these important business topics, that we should be infusing into our classrooms, and something for them to be aware of, be discussing, and really be looking to see what these trends are going to be doing as they unfold in the future. And so the first one of those privacy related trends is Google replacing third-party cookies, which we hear this term all the time, right? These third-party cookies, what are they exactly? Where advertisers are using these cookies to track which sites consumers are using and what they're doing on those sites. So Google's now looking to replace these cookies with a new way to track users that harvests data that is supposed to be a better way to do this for consumer privacy. And this is going to be the sandbox. So that's why you see here they're trading cookies for the sandbox. Sounds like a lot of things that maybe kids might be interested in, right? But there's a lot of big implications for this here, where the privacy sandbox is supposed to track what consumers are doing online, but stores the data on your device instead of sending it to Google or to other third parties. And then Chrome is going to, let's say, as an example sort of context, sort the users into cohorts. And then third parties can ask Chrome what cohort an individual user is in, but those third parties won't be able to learn about individual browsing behavior. So the idea is that individual pieces of personally identifiable information, going back to one of our original responses to what does privacy mean to me, that type of information, that those individual pieces are not all over the internet the way they are right now and have been for many, many years under this model of third-party cookies. But Chrome is the one with the power to tell advertisers its learnings if they're willing to pay, right? So advertisers must be willing to give Chrome some form of payment, some amount of money that will give them that information about this individual user who belongs to this particular cohort based on their behaviors online. Now, this has been starting to be discussed for the last couple of years, with conversations about Privacy Sandbox really ramping up earlier in 2024. But just earlier this week, actually, Google said that it will pivot to an opt-in model. So accepting or denying ad tracking at the browser level. And this represents a change from what they originally said they were going to be doing with Privacy Sandbox. They're going to continue investing in the sandbox. So it seems that third-party cookies are still going to be available for a little while, but eventually they likely won't be. So here may be an example of, as things got closer to implementing the sandbox, advertiser pressure may have been too stiff. Even a tech giant like Google feels that pressure. And the challenge here is that it continues to come at the expense of consumer privacy, because if Google starts to get concerned that advertisers won't find Google to be lucrative anymore, for Chrome to be lucrative in terms of a platform to advertise on, based on some of the ways that this data is changing, they're still going to be potentially putting consumer privacy at risk the way they always have been. So it's kind of tricky for a company like Google, right? Because you're working with these third-party advertisers that are very valuable, very lucrative to your business. But at the same time, you're supposed to be in the business of protecting consumers, right? And there's a lot more response, a lot more, sort of push for that, I think, now than there was even, let's say, 5 years ago. So this is one trend to watch and to kind of see how it unfolds. Because like I said, even just earlier this week, some big changes have come for what Google says they're going to do compared to what they had been saying. Okay, the second trend to keep a lookout for then is this switch from third-party data, right? If we're not going to have these cookies sort of tracking us in this way, we need to start thinking about how third parties' data is going to maybe be replaced, or something might be used in favor of it. So let's kind of look at the difference here that you see between zero-party and third-party data. Whereas third-party data, or third parties, discreetly gather data and track habits such that you don't even really realize it's happening. As long as you've accepted or enabled cookies, you're not really necessarily realizing that that's being collected. Zero-party data comes from a brand directly asking a customer for that data. So it's much harder to get than third-party data, but it's more privacy conscious in the sense that the person has to answer your question in order to provide that data. And also it's high quality data because they're the ones providing that information. It's not sort of being inferred or pieced together. It also puts the onus on the customer to be the one to explicitly share their data. So it's more empowering in the sense that it gives them the chance to provide it or not. So you can collect zero-party data to inform, for example, how to target social media ads to lookalike audiences, or consumers who have the same interests expressed by those who maybe took a quiz and provided answers to those quiz. That would be an example of zero-party data. So you'd still be able to engage in some targeting, and you'd maybe be able to make some inferences about a bigger population based on a sample, based on the information you have from that sample. But the data will be theoretically, like I said, more difficult to collect, but higher quality in the end. And so this idea of really zeroing in on zero-party data is something else to be watching for as third-party data starts to become more piecemeal, or perhaps as time moves on, less of the standard. Okay, a third trend to watch for is dark patterns. Sometimes it's called dark design. These are manipulative design techniques that put users' privacy at risk by maybe pushing them or nudging them into buying products or services or taking other actions that they otherwise would not have. So a really common sort of example is, for example, with subscription services. These are more popular than ever, right? Everybody has, or it seems like everybody has access to Amazon Prime these days, or they might subscribe to another streaming service or a music streaming service of some kind, or even other types of recurring type subscriptions to receive products sent to your home. But very interestingly, in 2024, the FTC did an analysis that found out that the majority of subscription services use at least one dark pattern to make people make decisions in a certain way. One of the most common is called sneaking. This is the inability to turn off auto renewal during the sign-up process. So it will make you have to go in later and try to find out a way to not auto renew your subscription monthly or yearly or whatever it might be. Whereas again, if that was something that was available right at the start from sign up, then people might make that decision differently versus having to go back in later and make that decision after it's maybe more out of sight, out of mind. Another common dark pattern is called nagging, or repeatedly asking a user to take an action. A good example of this is TikTok often asks users to upload their contacts, even after a user has said no, that they don't want to upload those contacts. This would be an example of nagging. So these dark patterns, there's a lot of different ones. They are being cracked down on right now in terms of trying to expose them. And I think a lot of times people don't even realize that this is a dark pattern. This is just something I'm used to from interacting with this website online. But it is definitely something to kind of keep in mind, because we're seeing so much more of, is this really helping people make an informed decision, or is this kind of encouraging them to make a decision that's more manipulative in the way that that product or service or that platform is designed? Okay, the fourth trend, we have just two more, 4 and 5. So the fourth trend that we're looking at here is a huge increase in federal and state level privacy regulations and regulatory effort pushes. So in 2023, 5 states enacted privacy laws, including California, Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, and Utah. And then many of these laws really center on giving residents more control over their data. That's kind of the general sort of idea, is that these states want their residents to have more control over what's happening with their data online. In 2024, we're going to see at least another handful of states have these privacy laws go into effect. In fact, as of May of 2024, nearly 2/3 of US states have introduced or enacted privacy laws. So everyone's sort of at very different levels right now, but I would say many states, as you can tell from this graphic here of the map of the US, this was just updated earlier this week. You can see that it is very different in terms of how many different states. There's a lot of different states at different places, from introduction or in committee to actually being passed or signed or enacted. Many states are actually doing this now, and there's just so much more media attention toward mental health related issues. There's more scrutiny of influencers and what influencers are doing, portraying unrealistic lifestyles, promoting too much consumption, which has actually sparked a de-influencing trend, which has been really interesting to follow as well. There's been a particular concern with many of these laws that we've seen for mom influencers or parent influencers profiting from sharing content of their children. We're seeing more and more children's brands targeting young parents with collaboration opportunities, influencer campaigns. Sometimes we're even seeing a pyramid of influence models, which kind of function like a pyramid scheme as we would think of it, but in this case, it's looking at leveraging the trend of social shopping. So partnering with one core celebrity mom, let's say 3 to 4 mega mommy and kid influencers, evergreen ambassadors, and everyday customers to really sort of leverage all the different types of appeal that these different types of parental influencers might have, and really kind of try to encourage people to promote more content about their children, to really kind of, put more out there. And that there's a lot of impact that these campaigns are having on the amount of sharing that's going on, which is something that Paul mentioned is one of my online one of my research interests, which is really the idea of parents sharing about their children on social media and kind of the privacy implications of that. So a lot of these laws really are also taking a close look at the impact for children using the internet or content that's being created about children on the internet. So especially with 2024 being an election year, this is a critical issue, right? Interestingly, privacy is a rather bipartisan sort of issue, and the majority of battleground voters do support kids' online safety laws. In general, like I said, online privacy is more bipartisan of an issue than many others. So it's something that we'll see in this election year, I think, continue to really gain some interest and really maybe from both sides. So finally, as it relates to the idea of more privacy regulation, privacy-related regulation, there's friction between sort of this move fast and break things, ask for forgiveness instead of permission type of mentality that tech companies like Meta have had for a couple of decades now, right? Facebook's been around for 2 decades, and the increasing amount of regulation. So we're seeing what, like I said, Facebook was used to many years of sort of moving fast, moving ahead of the speed that, regulatory efforts really could handle. And this is coming at a bit of a, I think, surprise in many cases for so many of these state laws now to be calling for more action, more control, more empowering the consumer, the users of these platforms. It's really sort of coming to a head with some of these very fast-paced movements that many of these tech companies have made. So this is not really new, this type of regulation in other countries like the UK. They've been doing this for far longer, but I would say in the US, this is really representing a trend that we're seeing quite a bit of happening here over the last couple of years, especially, and continuing in 2024. And then the last trend I want to kind of talk about today was really hinted at in the title of today's webinar. And this is really, we've talked a lot about Meta, we've talked about Facebook, Instagram. Let's look at TikTok, which is kind of a separate sort of entity, but definitely one that we hear a lot about when it comes to social media and privacy, because especially within the last year, marketers' success on TikTok in particular, especially for small businesses and entrepreneurs, has become very apparent. And by 2024, there's a big bipartisan effort to crack down on TikTok. In April, just a few months ago, there was a US law that was signed forcing TikTok's Chinese parent, ByteDance, to sell the popular video sharing app in the US or facing a ban. And really, if you look at both the two sides, it kind of boils down to proponents citing national security concerns, opponents saying that it censors freedom of speech and expression. China recently ordered Apple to remove some of Meta's apps like WhatsApp and Threads from its app store because of national concerns as well. And in doing so, they really are pushing some of these foreign companies further out. But really, all of these efforts from both sides are deepening the existing internet divide between the US and China. And again, this is something that we want to watch for, right? This is something that we need to be aware of. We should be discussing with our students so that they're aware of these different issues that are happening and some of these different world events that are occurring. Meanwhile, TikTok is also trying to offer other products like TikTok Notes as a standalone sort of photo app that would directly compete against Instagram, and then TikTok Lite, which pays users to watch videos, which is very interesting. It's been quietly released in different countries, France, Spain, some Asian countries as well. It doesn't really have any e-commerce or live streaming features, but users can watch videos and earn points for doing so, for liking content, for following content creators, and then they can exchange these points for Amazon vouchers or PayPal gift cards. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. The EU is interested in what it says about the app's potential impact on the protection of minors, especially as we are looking right now in the US and in other parts of the world as well. But we're really looking at the potential addictive nature of social media. But paying users to use social media and like content and engage with it is going to potentially increase those addictive type behaviors. So it's definitely something to watch for as part of this, sort of ongoing TikTok discussion is happening. And then I just wanted to kind of look, as we're wrapping up some of our conversation here, really beyond 2024. What should we be kind of thinking about as we wind down the year in the second half of 2024 and look ahead to 2025 and beyond? There's really something to be said for how we can kind of have this conversation in higher ed. And I know there might even be some K through 12 educators on this call as well, because Stukent also serves that market too. And the conversation about privacy and students is often focused on ed tech used in K through 12 schools. The argument is that although it's commonly used, there's sort of a widespread invasion of children's privacy through data collection with these ed tech apps, and there's often little evidence to support the supposed benefits. And also, schools and parents sometimes lack the expertise to make good decisions related to it, so they just sort of default to, if this app has my students do X, I'm going to let them do X, but not let them do Y because it doesn't let them do Y. And this is sort of enabling, the creator of these ed tech programs and platforms to be the decision makers. Now, college students don't often get included in this conversation because they are adults. But if adults themselves are having a hard time making some of these decisions as parents, as school administrators, it's hard to expect that college students would be able to make good privacy related decisions as well. And going back to the first trend we actually discussed today, Google is allowing users to decide whether they want to be tracked. So if you ask your students about privacy, and I encourage you to do so, especially if you teach even high school students or if you teach undergraduate students, talk to them about their online privacy. It's interesting. I often do this with my students throughout the semester. And in a lot of cases, they don't really have a huge desire to really care. They don't feel that there's something that really is compelling them to care a whole lot about it. Maybe beyond their very sensitive, personally identifiable information, like their social security number, their attitude is sort of, well, what's the big deal? They might not even realize that some of the data is being collected. For example, deterministic data that they're providing, in many cases, their name, their address, their email address, their date of birth, versus probabilistic data that's being compiled about them, like what kind of device they're using, their IP address, the page views as they browse the internet, whatever it might be. And in many cases, they find the benefits outweigh the risk, that they find personalized recommendations in scrolling through social media is fine to receive that information. It's helpful, that it outweighs the risks of potentially sharing either that deterministic information or having that probabilistic information compiled about them. So in general, society is really becoming increasingly sensitized to big data. So there are two big picture questions that I ask you to consider, which is, how will this change the fundamental view of privacy in society? As we become more sensitized to it as a society, as individual users, how will this change the way we think about privacy and what it means and what people's rights to privacy are in society? And as emerging business professionals, our college students who are preparing to become the next generation of marketers, those who will be making decisions at tech companies that design these tech services and platforms, what does an apathy toward privacy mean? How will it affect the way that these platforms are designed? And if we have regulation and we have these government entities coming in and calling for more scrutiny of it, how will these sort of forces maybe be opposing? Will they clash heads? What will be sort of the challenges that we'll be facing in the future? So again, I sort of ask you as, a closing question here, should we care about privacy? And think of it from maybe three different perspectives. As consumers, should we care about privacy? Because we're all consumers navigating this at that level, but we're also marketers in many cases. Many of us might be marketers. And as marketers, should we care about privacy? And then one area that I know all of us are kind of thinking about as well is, as educators, as our role as educators, can we afford not to teach our students about privacy? So these are kind of the three areas that I would encourage you to consider and think about and have these meaningful conversations. You may not come to a solid conclusion by the end of your discussion with your students, but I do think that it's important to raise these issues, to make them aware of it if they aren't already, and to have discussion about them to get them thinking in the right way, knowing that these are the marketing professionals of tomorrow that we're shaping, and it's an important topic to make sure that we all are having conversations about. So again, thank you for your time, your attention. These are ways to connect with me. I'd love to stay connected after the webinar. So please feel free to connect with me in these ways, and I'd also be happy to discuss or take questions now. So again, thank you for your time and attention and for the opportunity today.
Alexa, thank you. This was awesome. I love the way you drilled that down to those 5 trends. That was so insightful. Thank you for that. Great questions. We do have some questions that people have submitted, and I'll read those to you. First of all, I wanted to ask, you teach digital marketing, social media marketing, and consumer behavior, right?
Yes.
Do you go over this in all 3 of those classes?
We do, and we emphasize different areas. I would say that I cover it very in a very focused social media manner in my social media marketing class. We look at a broader perspective of online privacy in my digital marketing class, which is a graduate class. So that has a bit of a different sort of maybe sort of higher level take on it. And then my consumer behavior class is actually a junior level class, whereas social media is more of a senior class. So it's really just starting to kind of introduce the idea of, you know, really understanding technology in marketing, the role it plays in targeted advertising, personalized sort of marketing experiences, and how privacy also sort of should be considered as part of that initial understanding.
Great. Okay, well, let me read through some of these questions for you. Given the increasing emphasis on user privacy, what new skills or knowledge should be prioritized in social media marketing education?
That's a great question. You know, I think that from the biggest skill I would say that students really kind of need to consider is being sort of having a dual mindset when it comes to privacy, because so often we're talking about to our students about really making sure that they as emerging marketing professionals are focused on the best, most effective experience for our consumers, for our end users of our content, whoever's receiving the messages that we're providing through all these different means of connecting with them through the thousands of touch points that are available every day. And as long as it's the most effective and cost-effective way that we can possibly reach them, to really make sure that they are taking the steps we want them to take, making the decisions that are going to make sense, that it's the right path to pursue. But I think also making sure that our students are thinking about what makes sense to also encourage consumers not to just share information at all costs, and to really sort of build in that mindset of how can we encourage our consumers and our users to interact with our platforms, and we can send them targeted communications, but still be mindful of the information that they are sharing. Consider it a privilege that information is being shared with us, that we should take that responsibility very seriously, and be thinking about concrete ways that we can try to improve that privacy experience, that we're not just sort of agreeing to at all costs, I guess I could say, to encourage people to, you know, make decisions that might not have their privacy at stake. So I think just bringing that into the conversation with marketing students and making sure that they understand that. And I kind of call that sort of a 360 view of marketing, is not just looking at what's most effective to reach consumers, what's most cost effective, but also what's from a consumer well-being perspective. Are we really considering, is this going to be helpful for consumers from all aspects, including something like protecting their privacy?
Yeah, I think, you know, that kind of goes into this next question here. It's very similar to what you were just talking about, but how can educators teach students to measure the effectiveness of, let's say, their social media campaign without compromising, you know, this user data that they're trusted with?
Right. I think it's making sure that, you know, in a lot of cases that it's communicated to users. It's, you know, not so much in some ways that you aren't able to capture that data, that you're not even, that, like I said, sometimes being able to create a lookalike audience that is very similar to an existing customer base that you already have. These can be very powerful ways to, you know, harness the data that we have access to. But I think it's in a lot of cases about making it understandable for people and making sure that they know this is what's going on. Less legal jargon, right? Less sort of long paragraphs of privacy policies that, let's be honest, most internet users, social media users, whatever it might be, aren't reading in many cases because they're assuming that they just have to kind of go through it and check the box and say, yes, I agree, right? Give them more information about what's really going on in a way that the average user could really understand and would take the time to maybe read or hear or see as a video or whatever it might be. So I think being able to just make better, help people make better, more informed decisions about the privacy choices that they make would be a good way to, be able to continue to engage with them and personalize information to them and still help it, be that way, but not at the expense of maybe not even knowing what they're agreeing to.
Good advice. Have you used any real world case studies in your classes to talk about these ethical issues?
I pull a lot from current examples that are happening now. I really try to keep a pulse on what's happening currently, and bring in those conversations. I do a little bit here, and I wouldn't say like big case studies, like formal kind of case study assignments, the way other faculty may approach it. But for example, there was an issue related to GoodRx that had a data breach happen, and the way they sort of handled that information wasn't necessarily, the way they handled the breach and how they kind of communicated with people wasn't necessarily maybe making some of the best decisions. So when that happened a year or two ago, maybe, I brought that into the classroom as an example and said, let's read the article, let's talk about it, let's talk about how maybe, the company could have made a better decision in terms of how they handled this data breach. So I would say I kind of approach it from that perspective more often, and as opposed to sort of a bigger picture sort of case study about it. The other thing that my students will actually do is I'll choose different articles that are relevant at the time in that semester, or sometimes something that might have, if it was like really a groundbreaking sort of article, maybe something related to one of these trends that I had talked about, and I'll have them read the article ahead of time and then come to class and we'll discuss it. And then I'll have them engage in some sort of an activity like, proponents and opponents to how this was handled, flesh out your arguments, and then sort of have a debate on who was right and who was wrong, so to speak. And a lot of times the students can't come to a conclusion of this was the best way to handle it versus that way. They see there's advantages and disadvantages to approaching it one way versus another. And so it really just kind of highlights the complex nature of it. So I would encourage educators who are looking to do this to maybe find articles that resonate with them, and to encourage students to, maybe read those articles and bring them to class and have informed debates and discussions about it. And is there a clear side? Not always. And maybe being able to see how sometimes the privacy related issues aren't black and white. And it really highlights the challenging nature of handling some of these things from a marketer's perspective.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Alexa. This was a very insightful presentation and just very relevant trends that you discussed with us today. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Now, as a reminder, don't forget to get your free instructor access to the social media bundle that we have. And also, Alexa has created an assignment and a handout for you, and we will throw that up so that you can download that, and we'll make sure that that's emailed out with that. So we want to thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate that you took time to be with us, and we hope you enjoyed the event. And we want to remind you always to remember to stay current with Stukent. Thanks, everyone.